Thanks. All right, is this microphone on? Can you hear me? Thumbs up? All right, excellent. So my name is, in fact, James, and today I'm going to talk to you about a new technique for reducing the bandwidth requirements of mobile browsing. So as we're all aware, mobile devices are an integral part of our lives. They make it less awkward when we don't want to make eye contact with people. Everybody's aware. Now, one of the main things that people do on their phones is they browse the web. As it turns out, mobile browsing actually generates more traffic now than desktop browsing. It consumes 63% of user focus time and 54% of overall CPU time. And furthermore, many apps that don't look like their web browsers are actually using components like web views to fetch and render content. So HTTP traffic is created by a variety of workloads. But alas, mobile bandwidth is precious. Many people have data plans which charge users according to the amount of bandwidth that they consume. So mobile HTTP traffic is best understood as being constructed of tiny pieces of money that fly out of your wallet and are consumed by the base station. But wait, browser caching helps, right? So the whole point of these caches is to prevent browsers from making these redundant object fetches. Sadly, browser caches disappoint. As I'll describe in this talk, the fundamental problem with traditional browser caches is that the cache keys are URLs, not some type of content-based mechanism. And this lack of content awareness is going to lead to alias misses, in which the browser fetches data that's already been fetched in an earlier session. So the problem with this is that these alias misses result in phones using more bandwidth and pages load more slowly than necessary. So our research in this talk is going to provide two contributions. So first, we're going to provide an empirical study of traditional caching logic on mobile phones. We're going to look at the top 500 most popular sites, and we're going to find that all of them suffer from some type of alias-induced caching. We also find that in an optimal content-based caching scheme, we can remove 75% of the caches. The second contribution of this work is a proposal for a new way to proxy mobile web traffic. We call that proposal RC2 for reasons that I'll describe soon. So the basic idea is that the proxy is going to rewrite the HTML that is returned to mobile devices, changing the way that the device caches content and removing a lot of those alias-based misses. So we built a prototype RC2 system, and we found that RC2 is going to save 52% more bandwidth than a traditional caching scheme. It removes a second of load time from the median page load, and it enables 99% of the benefits that you would find with an optimal content-based caching scheme. And importantly, our system requires no changes to mobile devices or their software. So here's an outline for the rest of the talk. First, I'll give you an overview of how traditional caching works. Then I'll describe how RC2 works and share some experimental results. And finally, I'll conclude by discussing some open challenges to fully realizing this brilliant RC2 vision that will clearly result in multiple term rewards. So, how do traditional browser caches work? Well, in a traditional cache, the keys are URLs, the values are HTTP objects like JavaScript files or CSS files, and HTTP response headers returned by the server determine the cacheability of objects. So for example, suppose we have a phone and a web server. The phone issues an HTTP request for an object, and the server is going to respond with the bytes in that object. And the server also returns a caching header, as shown here in blue. So in this example, the phone should cache the object for 1,000 seconds. So the device is going to store the bytes that were returned using that URL up there as the cache key. Now, this approach for caching has been used for thousands of years by countless civilizations. Unfortunately, there is a problem. It's these alias-based misses that I was describing to you. So this happens when the client caches a set of bytes using one URL and then fetches those same bytes using a different URL. And that second fetch is going to miss in the cache. So, for example, consider the problem of modified domain names. So the user issues a fetch for a cat picture posted by x.site.com, and later issues a fetch for the same set of bytes posted on y.site.com. Even if the first picture was marked as cacheable, the second request will fail to hit in cache. So as another example, consider the problem of modified resource names. So first you try to download a picture named cat.jpg, and then you want to fetch a picture called cat.jpg. You want to fetch that second cat with emphasis. So what will end up happening is that once again, that second fetch will miss in the cache even if the pictures being downloaded are the same. And you can imagine other types of misses as well. So for example, two URLs might differ only by their query string. As it turns out, web servers oftentimes return the same content regardless of what the query string is. And you can also imagine a problem with improper caching headers. So the server might say that an object is not cacheable even though it doesn't really change over time. So the key point in all of these examples is that the cat has not changed. Okay? So browsers are fetching objects that they shouldn't have to fetch. Now this is where RC2 comes in. So now I'll talk to you about how RC2 works. But to understand it, first you have to understand how RDR proxy works. So RDR stands for Remote Dependency Resolution. This is used by systems like Amazon Silk and by Opera Mini. So let's explain it using an example. So we've got a phone, we've got a proxy, and we have a web server. The phone is going to issue an HTTP request for a page. The proxy is going to forward that request to the web server and receive the HTML on the page. Now at this point, the proxy is going to launch a headless browser like Phantom.js. So a headless browser is just a browser that doesn't display any visual content, but in all other respects is equivalent to another browser, like Firefox or Chrome. So the headless browser on the proxy is going to issue fetches for all of the external content in the page. So in this example, the headless browser is going to issue fetches for an image object and two JavaScript files. So meanwhile, the browser will return the top-level HTML to the phone. The browser on the phone is going to parse the HTML and issue fetches for those external objects. The proxy then returns those objects as the phone requests them. Now, for the purposes of this talk, the most important thing about an RDR proxy is that the proxy can alter the HTML or the external objects in a page before returning that content to the mobile device. So if you understand that, then the basic idea behind RC2 is pretty straightforward. An RC2 proxy is an RDR proxy. It looks at the HTTP response headers to track which objects a client will cache. The proxy then leverages this knowledge to eliminate the client-side aliases by rewriting the source attributes in HTML tags that are returned to the mobile phone. So let's look at an example. So once again, we have a phone, we have a proxy, we have a web server. At the beginning of this example, assume that the phone's cache is empty. So the phone issues a fetch for the top-level HTML in the page. The proxy issues that fetch and receives the HTML. The proxy issues a fetch for the first external object, which in this case is a JPEG. Now as the fetch issues, the proxy is going to launch a special process, okay, which is going to await the return of the object. And when the object returns, the process will calculate the hash value for the object. Now in this diagram here, we're going to represent hash values as colors, okay, because nobody wants to see a huge hex string up there. So as you can see, once the proxy calculates the hash value, it updates a per client table. Now this table right now is going to say that the client will receive an object with the red hash value. The client's traditional browser cache will store that object using the name x.jpg and will cache it for 500 seconds. And the proxy understands how long the client will cache it just by looking at those HTTP response headers. So once the proxy updates the table for the image, the proxy continues to fetch the remaining external objects in the page. So the proxy fetches y.js, determines that the file has a blue hash, and updates the table accordingly. Then the proxy is going to fetch z.js, determine that that file has a yellow hash, and update the table. Meanwhile, the client retrieves the top-level HTML for the page and fetches those individual objects. Once the page load is complete, the client's traditional browser cache will store the red hash object using the key x.com/x.jpg, and the blue hash object using the key y.com/y.js, and the yellow hash object using the key z.com/z.js. Now imagine that some time elapses, seasons come and go, cute children grow up to become bitter kids. And then the same client from the previous example tries to load a new web page. Now remember, this is the situation that we had back in the day. Okay, the phone on the left has a traditional browser cache with 3 items. And in the middle, the RC2 proxy has a table which models the client-side cache. So the client's going to issue a fetch for the new page. The RC2 proxy is going to fetch the HTML, load it inside the headless browser, and start fetching the external objects. The proxy fetches the first object, looks at the per client table, and notices that the client has a cached object with the same URL and the same hash, which is the red hash. So the proxy doesn't rewrite any source attributes for the tag, because the client browser will correctly load the proper sets of bits from the cache. So similarly, the proxy is going to fetch the external object, which is the second one, determine that the client already has a copy of that with the same URL and the same bits, so the proxy won't rewrite this HTML tag either. The proxy fetches the last object, which is named new.com/new.js. Now note that the client-side cache on the left does not contain an object which has that URL. However, that newly fetched object has that yellow hash. And so what the proxy is going to do is look at that last entry in the table and see that the client does store an object that has the yellow hash using that URL key z.com/c.js. So the proxy rewrites the last HTML tag so that the source attribute points to z.js. So in this way, when the client loads the page, the last HTML tag will generate a hit. So at this point, you can understand the name RC2. It means remote control caching, and it's inspired by the fact that the proxy uses HTML rewriting to take control of how the mobile device manages its cache. So RC2 is the name of the system, it's trademarked, it's copyrighted, it's on the blockchain, which all of you know is immutable, unless the developers disagree, or unless there's a selfish mining attack, or any of the thousands of other things which make blockchains completely impractical for realistic use cases. Anyways, I want to talk about this. Talk to me afterwards in the hallway when we learn about blockchains. So, at this point, I will now give you a few slides of evaluation for the RC2 prototype that we built. Our test corpus consisted of the top 500 most popular websites in the world. The results I'll show you today actually looked at landing pages, but we got similar results for interior pages as well. When possible, we use the mobile optimized version of all these sites. To record the page content and later replay it to the proxy, we use the Mahi tool, and our test device was a Nexus 5 Chrome, and it ran Chrome. So here we see a CDF for the percentage of traditional cache misses that RC2 avoids. We examined two different scenarios for a warm cache page load. The red line shows the immediate warm cache page load, where the client loaded the page back to back in quick succession. And the blue line shows the 8-hour delay scenario, in which the two page loads were separated by 8 hours. So if we draw a horizontal line at 0.5, we can look at RC2's performance for the median page. And what we see is that RC2 avoids 75% at the median of the traditional cache misses. That's pretty impressive. Okay, now at this point, we're going to try something that usually only works in spy movies. Image, center, image, enhance. It actually works. That's amazing. This is why I became a computer scientist. Now, what we see here is that the savings that we observe in RC2 are actually 3 times the savings that were observed in Kelly and Mobile's 2002 study of content-based caching's effectiveness on the web. Even Pi actually did a more recent study of content-based caching in 2011, but the savings that we found are still 2 times as large as what they found. So that means that content-based aliasing is still a big problem on the web today. So what exactly do those misses look like? Well, let's see. So 30% of those unnecessary alias misses involve improper caching headers. The server said that an object shouldn't be marked as cacheable, but it actually was fetched again by a client later on. 30% of those alias misses are caused by modified domain names. This can be caused by things like CDNs or domain sharding, things like that. 21% of the alias misses are caused by modified query strings, and 5% are caused by modified resource names. But if you only remember one thing from this slide, it should be this. Every single test page exhibited at least one of these problems, okay? So it's important to understand that this is actually a real problem that we see out there in the web. Now this slide here is going to describe the amount of bandwidth that is saved by 3 caching schemes. The y-axis is going to represent kilobytes of bandwidth saved. So on the left, we see the performance of traditional caching. On the right, we see the performance of an optimal content-based scheme. And in the middle, we see RC2. So let me comment on a couple things. First, note that RC2 is within 1% of the optimal scheme. So that's pretty good. And second, RC2 is twice as good as traditional caching. And the raw difference is non-trivial. It's about 469 kilobytes. The median page size in our test corpus was about 1.4 megabytes, so this difference is actually pretty non-trivial. And the last evaluation result that I want to show you involves page load times. So here we see the performance of traditional caching in pink and RC2 in the blue color. And in these results, the client has completely empty cache, right? Completely cold cache. So we see that RC2 results in page loads that are slightly slower than normal page loads by about 40 milliseconds. And the reason for that is that in RC2, there's actually double computation for things like evaluating JavaScript. And most of those overlapping computations can be hidden from the device, but some of them are not actually overlapped. So that explains that performance difference there. However, 40 milliseconds between friends doesn't seem like that much. Now let's take a look at what happens when clients have a warm cache. So here, when client caches are warm, RC2 leads to bigger reductions in page load time, almost a full second of reduction. And note that this reduction is actually twice as large as the savings that were found in a recent ATC paper that tried to model what happens in mobile clients when they try to cache content. Now that paper there actually modeled a quote-unquote perfect cache that was infinitely sized and stored all of the data that was marked as cacheable by the server. But note that in that definition of a perfect cache, you can still have alias-based misses. And so that's why our results are much better there. Now before I conclude, I want to discuss a few of the research challenges that need to be solved before RC2 can really be deployed in the wild. Now once again, we're going to try another trick that usually only works in movies. We're going to open up a socket to the challenges section. So let's open up a terminal here. So we're going to open socket to challenges. Let's see what happens. God, it takes us directly to 4chan. Don't look at it. Okay, it's much like an eclipse. You have to wear special glasses so that your mind isn't destroyed by what you find on 4chan. Anyways, this is why you don't do live demos. That's a note for all the young grad students out there. So the biggest challenge to realizing the RC2 vision is the migration towards HTTPS content. Right? So here's a graph that shows that trend. So on the x-axis, we're starting at January 2014, going all the way up to today. And what we see is that the fraction of HTTPS content has grown from roughly 29% to 70%. So what does that mean for RC2? Well, RDR proxies in general need to be able to see clear text data. And in particular, an RC2 proxy needs to be able to see clear text HTML so that the source attributes can be rewritten. Right? So to do this kind of rewriting, you could imagine that maybe proxies can man in the middle, that TLS stream, and actually see the clear text content that way. This, of course, makes the tinfoil hats amongst us nervous because TLS provides end-to-end guarantees. So perhaps there's a solution here that involves encrypted computation, something like functional encryption, which would allow the proxy to compute over encrypted data. The problem of this is, of course, that this stuff runs slower than the age of the universe. So me and some other people are actually thinking about how we can actually make this more efficient. So in conclusion, bandwidth is precious on mobile phones. Traditional browser caches suffer from these alias misses, which actually make them consume more bandwidth than necessary. So in this talk, I've described RC2, which is a proxying system that rewrites HTML to avoid these misses. It saves 52% more bandwidth than traditional cache logic, removes a second of load time, and provides 99% of the optimal benefits. And finally, but not least, it works on unmodified browsers. With that, I thank you for your time, and I'm glad